I invite Elder Butch Dick of Songhees Nation to lead the House in prayer or reflect.
Ai ko chel siam chia asa yu kwelapten chile san la kwangan. Asiam nu stielacha, asiam nu squalaqua, aishqa quantana techel la kwangan tanuch, aishqa siam nu quilia. Thank you very much for having me back again today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've got a lot to be thankful for in the past year, and I would like to extend my gratitude to the frontline workers, the healthcare workers, and all the people that work in grocery stores, which includes my family. So we're very appreciative of all the things that all people have done, in particular this House, and how you've looked after the province and everyone in the province. In particular, I'd like to raise my hands to Minister Adrian Dix and, of course, Dr. Henry. So our community has been fairly lucky. We've stayed healthy, and that's because of other people taking care of us. So I always welcome being able to come to this House. I want to thank the people that work in this House for being so accommodating and comforting. I always feel welcome when I come here, and that's because of the staff that are in this House. So I'd like to thank Karen from the Speaker's office and everyone else. So I'd like to do a song before I leave today, and again I want to raise my hands to each and everyone in this House. So thank you very much, and I'd like to do a song.
Thank you so much. Introductions by members. Member for Richmond Steveston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next week is my mom's birthday. She taught me how to be strong, that normal is boring, and how to make the best butter tarts in the world. Many people say their mom knows everything. If you watch Jeopardy with her, you'd realize it's true. She does know everything. My mom is the very best grandma to her 7 grandchildren. Will everyone please join me in wishing her a happy birthday?
Member for Saanich North and Islands. Okay, we'll go to member for Langley East.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I wanted to take a moment to wish to constituents and friends of mine in my riding a happy 15th anniversary. David Lyons Black and Dale Lyons Black are the first same-sex couple to be married in Langley all those years ago. I was wondering if the House could please join me in wishing them a very happy 15th anniversary. My second introduction, Honourable Speaker, is for my daughter. In a few short days, she is going to be turning 16 years old. And as we won't be here next week for me to be able to wish her in this happy birthday in this house, I was wondering if the House could join me today in wishing her a very happy early birthday.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pride to introduce Ms. Cutler's class from White Rock Elementary, who are joining us virtually today. I want to thank all the kids in the class and Ms. Cutler for making the time to watch us in action. I do want to single out one student in that class, and that is Benjamin, who is my son, and who's also one of my best friends. And you know, being over here, we haven't been able to see each other as much as we like, but Dad is excited to come home. And I'll also point out tonight, for both my sons, Benjamin and Nicholas, tonight is their grad night. I won't be joining them for that as well, but I just want to let them know Dad is proud, and I look forward to a great weekend ahead. Thank you.
Member for Richmond Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the House please join me and my colleague from Richmond, Steveston, in wishing a happy 103rd birthday to Shizuko Nishi. Born in Japan, moved to Steveston in 1937. Last week, she marked this amazing milestone with a family gathering and celebration at her current home in East Richmond. Please join us in wishing Shizuko a happy 103rd birthday.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Because it is the last day of session for the spring session, it's my opportunity to thank those wonderful interns who've assisted our side of the House, and the other opposition has interns that they also have assisting them. And so it's my great pleasure to recognize and thank Kate Olivares, Gabriel Martz, Rachel McMillan, Carla Bryson, and Ariane Zan. Would the House please thank our wonderful interns for everything they've done this session.
Member for Cariboo North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would humbly ask all of the members of the Legislature to join with me to acknowledge all of our post-secondary technical and skills graduates from across British Columbia. For each of us to share our profound respect for your perseverance during a very difficult time, and to share our absolute confidence in each of you for what I know is going to be a successful future. Would the House please help me and recognize all of our amazing graduates across British Columbia?
Member for Kootenay East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It appears I have something in common with the member from Langley East. I as well have a daughter that is turning 16 on 1 month from today, exactly, actually July 17th. My daughter, Ali Shapitka, will be turning sweet 16. So I'd just like to mention that, and if the House would just please join me in wishing her a happy birthday. It'd be great. Thanks.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the hard work of 5 special members of this session's BC Liberal Caucus team: Moira Lowe, Camille Hazel, Michael Kurliak, William Kelly, and Gabrielle Perron. This impressive group are the BC Legislative Internship Program placements in our caucus this year. Over the course of this legislative session, they have become important members of our team, and today, on their final day with us, I want to take the time to thank them. They thank them for contributing their ideas, sharing their insights, and helping us serve British Columbians as the province's official opposition. I want to thank Gabrielle for all her work with the communications team, helping MLAs with scripts, speeches, and making sure the work we do here in the House is shared with British Columbians. I want to thank William for helping film videos and producing social media content as we reach out online to people throughout the province. Your work made us better. I want to thank Camille, who is passionate about a holistic approach to complex care housing, providing invaluable support to our research team during mental health and addictions estimates and housing estimates. I want to thank Michael, whose keen interest in economics and financial issues was obvious and it was helpful, as he pitched in on jobs ministry and finance estimates and proved that he has a drive to get things done. And I want to thank Moira for her impressive work ethic as she helped me personally and our research team in preparing for senior services and long-term care estimates with her incredible knowledge from her time with the Office of the BC Seniors Advocate. On behalf of our entire caucus, I want to say it has been an absolute pleasure to get to know you. Amidst the difficulties and uncertainties brought on by the pandemic, I applaud you for your adaptability and your strength. Best of luck in your future endeavors. I know without a doubt that the future is bright for each of you. I can't wait to see where the future takes you. Heartfelt thank you.
Member for Coquitlam Burke Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, it's with a heavy heart I rise to pay tribute to the life of Tri-Cities legend Don Gillespie. Don dedicated his life to the protection and betterment of the environment. He spent almost 40 years in his retirement as a volunteer preserving natural areas for others to explore and enjoy. He was literally a trailblazer, making Burke Mountain accessible to hikers by clearing trails, brushing out old logging roads, and opening up amazing views. Today, Burke Mountain is part of Pinecone Burke Mountain Provincial Park. And the park's most popular trails, the Woodland Park Walk, the Coquitlam Lake View Trail, and portions of the Fool's Gold Trail are all trails created by Don. As a tribute to his trailblazing, one of the highest peaks was named after him, Mount Gillespie. Don and his good friend Doug Benny created the popular Sheep Paddock Trail along the Coquitlam River in Colony Farm Regional Park. He also built trails on Coquitlam's Riverview lands. Don and his contagious smile had a contagious smile and was quick to tell a story. He was a mentor to many and a passionate advocate for nature. Don was a strong community leader who was determined to make things better for future generations. Donnie, as I used to call him, was quick to remind you what needed to be done. And don't bother with any of those excuses. You better just quit talking and get to it. A longtime member of the Burke Mountain Naturalists, he and his wife Norma worked tirelessly for decades to designate and protect natural spaces in and around the Tri-Cities. He also volunteered with Friends of de Beauville Slough, Coquitlam River Watch, the Friends of Douglas Island, the Wilderness Committee, Riverview Horticultural Center Society, and Colony Farm Park Association. Our entire community owes a debt of gratitude to Don for his great work and tremendous advocacy. On behalf of the Tri-City MLAs, our deepest condolences go to his loving wife, Norma, his 5 children, Michael, Donald, Christine, Ian, and John, and his 10 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Donnie will truly be missed, but not forgotten. Rest easy, my friend.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going. Mr. Speaker, throughout our province, there are communities we are all able to boast about, communities which time and time again punch above their weight with respect to the impact they have at the ground level in helping our province's most vulnerable. On the shores of the Little Shuswap, the village of Chase epitomizes heartwarming community spirit with unwavering support for the local food bank known as the Chase Hamper. Under the leadership of Maureen MacDonald, this organization, born out of necessity in the early 1990s, is indeed a difference maker and quite possibly a lifesaver for many people who, through no fault of their own, require assistance to feed themselves and their families. And as every member of this chamber knows, this is no small task. Over the past year, largely because of the pandemic, the number of people receiving help at the Chase Hamper has increased fourfold. from within the vast area that they serve, including Chase, neighboring First Nations bands, Pritchard, Chase Creek, Turtle Valley, Lee Creek, Calista, Magna Bay, Anglemont, and Seymour Arm. These challenges in difficult times have been met with vigor, as the Chase Hampers volunteer base has also exploded to nearly 50 since the pandemic hit. And through it all, the Chase Hamper forges on with its nothing will stop us attitude. Chase is a small community of only 2,500 residents, but last December, through the generosity of area residents, the Hamper was able to restock its supplies with over 4,200 pounds of food donations. This month, Maureen McDonald and her colleagues are busily making plans to resume a senior meals program in July following the upgrade of the Chase Community Hall kitchen. They've also just launched an innovative partnership with the BC Farmers Market Association, which will see Hamper clients receive coupons for locally grown fresh produce. And the Chase Hamper is especially proud of the fact that they employ 9 people with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, when the going gets tough, the tough indeed get going. Something exemplified each and every day by the Chase Hamper and a very caring community. Thank you.
Member for Langley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, a few months ago, I had my first week here at the Legislature on the precinct grounds. And on my way to find my spacious and well-lit basement office underneath the library stacks, I got lost and I stumbled on a room full of wide-eyed and engaged young people, this year's interns from the Government Caucus. Now, I'll confess, Mr. Speaker, that at first I approached them with a sense of confidence. I thought they'd be excited to meet a new government MLA, a parliamentary secretary. So I engaged with them and we had a brief conversation. My confidence quickly turned to surprise as I realized how accomplished they already are at such a young age and the big plans and ambitions they have with their lives. And that sense of surprise quickly turned into a dawning horror as I looked past them and I saw the whiteboard with photos of all the Government Caucus members and tallies next to them. And I realized that what these kids were doing is they had created an elaborate system for ranking government MLAs. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, if I'm not working for one of these kids in the near future, I definitely need them for job references. So I quickly tried to assert myself as the head of the pack and made stopping in to visit them on a weekly basis a part of my repertoire and paying tribute with gifts. Now, I realized I can't compete with the Vancouver Island MLAs. My colleagues from the island have much greater access to the legislature in these times. So I began making elaborate distractions so I could use a dry erase marker to remove points from my colleagues, the Premier, the Minister for Municipal Affairs, the member for Parksville Qualicum, and others. So I hope I've ended up with a respectable tally at the end of the day. But, you know, I've learned a valuable lesson from this group, Mr. Speaker, and that's underneath every successful caucus is a basement filled with interns. So I just want to thank Arian Zand, Rachel McMillan, Kate Oliveris, Calla Bryson, and Gabriel Call Me Ray Ray Martz. Thanks.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and it's nice to see all the gratitude being expressed today in the House. It's a great way to end our session. I love coming to work. Before all my esteemed colleagues in here take all the credit for the joy and purpose I find in my role, I'm going to put it on the record that it really is the amazing team of people in our caucus office who fill my days with happiness. My colleague from Saanich North and the Islands and I could not possibly do the work we've been doing without all of the hard work from our crew in the BC Green caucus office. Judy Rendeck keeps our schedules humming and flowing and manages all of our administrative tasks with an ease that is truly a wonder to behold. Sarah Miller and Haley May go deep on our policy files, ensuring that we are, in fact, evidence-based and fact-driven in our work. Kaylee Cray Domingo ensures that our connections to the outside world of this building enrich and inform the work we do inside. Jojo Beatty and Federico Serrani are accomplished communication experts, making sure we're telling the stories that matter to people. Federico also has a particular talent with memes, having brought us Gen Xers up to speed on this artful approach with a very informative PowerPoint a year ago, explaining the difference between a meme, good, and an infographic, boring. Abby Koenig joined our small and mighty team as our intern this year, and she has been an incredible addition to the crew. She has written statements, QP questions, estimates questions, and introduced the daily wrap, which we shall be keeping, note to staff, capturing all the action each day in an email to our caucus and constituency offices. Abby has artfully and professionally managed our rather complicated estimate schedules, making sure that 2 MLAs are somehow in 3 houses at all times with the right questions at the right time. We will deeply miss Abby. And on behalf of our team, I want to express our sincere thanks for her excellent work and our very best wishes for her next adventure.
Member for Richmond Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Probably the tightest spot in the House here. At the close of this session, I'm reminded of our collective obligations as we head back to our respective homes. As I walked up towards what is truly a majestic building, adorned with stone and topped in teal domes, I was struck by the blanket of shoes and orange shirts that greeted me. The last few weeks have been a particularly poignant reminder of how deep racism and white supremacy runs in our society. The reminder from Kamloops of the harsh reality of colonialism and the numerous injustices, violence, and genocide perpetrated on Indigenous people in the past and still very much alive in the vestiges of colonialism today. The rapid rise of racism, even calling it a rise, seems to me a misnomer, as that racism has always been there under the very thin veneer of respectability and tolerance. It is in fact one of the seminal founding concepts of this country and something that we need to fight and work against every day that we show up here. The impact of COVID on laying bare the anti-Asian sentiment that lay just under that veneer, to the sickening rise of hate, white supremacy, and Islamophobia, whose natural result we saw in the murder of the Faisal family in London. I spoke with members of the Muslim community. 2 of the larger mosques are located in the constituency which I represent. That incident did not come as a shock to them. They did not have a "how could it happen here" moment. They have seen the rise of hate, and this, as I said, is the natural result. They reminded me that these actions don't happen in a vacuum. They start with seemingly innocuous comments and attitudes, dog whistling often centered around the othering of racialized people, targeting the most vulnerable, refugees, immigrants, immigration policies. We've all spoken about this hate and how it affects us or the ones we love, our grandchildren, spouses, friends. As we step away from here, I hope that you will join me in looking within yourselves and make the space in your communities to listen to the stories and the words of the people affected, and that you'll hear those words so that when we get back here, we can continue together to make the decisions that will take us to a better place and that allow us to confront the reality of the history of violence and genocide that is so much a part of this place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of State for Lands and Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As this session comes to an end, it is a time of reflection and gratitude. The incredible privilege we all share to serve this beautiful province to the best of our abilities. This has been a most challenging and painful time as well, facing the dual epidemics of COVID and the opioid crisis, and the incredibly heart-wrenching discoveries of the 215 young bodies buried in unmarked graves in Kamloops. On Monday is National Indigenous Peoples Day, of course, and this year I will be driving the 14 hours from my home here in Smithers in Wet'suwet'en-Gidimt'en territory up the road to Lower Post in Cascadena territory. I'll be joining the Premier, the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, the Member of Parliament, Taylor Bachrach, at the invitation of the Cascadena. We'll be there to witness a ceremony that should in fact have happened decades ago, the tearing down, the demolishing of the residential school. The Casca were forced to enter this building for many, many years. And as Deputy Chief Harlan Schilling said, the Lower Post residential school building has been a dark cloud over our people for far too long, and stood in the center of our community as a reminder of a very painful past. Mr. Speaker, we are not just there to demolish that building, but we are there to build something new with the support of the federal government, and Minister of State Mark Miller, we are building a new building with the Casca, a government building, a cultural, education, and recreational center for their people. As Taku River Tlingit spokesperson John Ward said, I believe this event can lead the way for all of Canada, because all of Canada needs to heal. This has been a most difficult time for many, but as we emerge from this pandemic, we are filled with a sense of hope and gratitude. And we as a province and as a country must face our past together, because perhaps together we can heal together. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the words from the Minister of State as well. And certainly, as we approach Indigenous Day on Monday, and reflecting on what the discovery and Kamloops of the 215 lost children, what it has done for us as a community, as a nation, in terms of a conversation around reconciliation, and how serious it is that we all move forward in a good way and in a meaningful way. Certainly, the events that have led to the Lower Post being able to find the support from governments, finally, federal and provincial, for the removal of their school at their asking is a very important step. And we all know that First Nations have a very complicated history with the residential school system. And I say that because there are some nations that have chosen not to remove their schools. So we cannot just assume that all schools need to be removed, but we need to be working in a much quicker fashion to support across jurisdictions, federal and provincial, to support those nations that do choose to remove these buildings that have inflicted so much generational pain amongst their people. Because it shouldn't take decades to help facilitate and move forward with something like this. It shouldn't take decades, frankly, to make sure there's clean drinking water. And so if we are going to be truly meaningfully engaging in reconciliation, we need to be taking the requests and the asks moving forward from these Indigenous nations quite seriously, and actually find ways to action them. The Lower Post removal is a good step in that direction, and it makes us all happy to know that will finally happen at the direction of the leadership up in Lower Post. So I thank you for this time, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to more meaningful, tangible actions towards reconciliation in the days, weeks, and months and years ahead.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my colleague from Richmond, Queensborough, Haisquisiam, for your powerful words this morning. Thank you to my colleagues, the Minister of State for Lands and the Opposition House Leader, for your words. Over the next few days, my prayers will be with our relatives of the Cascadena as they deconstruct the residential school that still stands in their community. This is an important part of the healing process for our northern relatives. As British Columbians embrace a greater awareness and understanding of the despicable history of our colonial past, the stories of this provincial government, the stories of our federal government that created the laws and policy that provide the structure for the forced assimilation of Indigenous people, those laws and policies were created in the same way that we create the laws and policies in this chamber today. We know that while the physical reminders of the history of residential schools can be removed by tearing down walls, psychological and spiritual impacts are carried for a lifetime, and the trauma is passed from one generation to the next. This provincial government must never forget the role that elected members, represented by the 87 of us that sit in these seats today, played in advancing these horrific policies. We have inherited those stories. And if we are to truly reconcile that history, we must change more than the language that we use. We must also change our actions. The residential schools were established to remove the Indian and the child, to disrupt our beautiful cultures and to dispossess us from our lands. In many ways, this government is continuing that dispossession. The policies that removed Indigenous governance structures and the scattering of our ancestral remains and items of cultural significance were pivotal for Crown governments to gain control over those lands and resources. However, we can be different. Investments in Indigenous language revitalization is an important start, not just for 3 years, but in perpetuity. I've repeatedly implored this government to do more than just a cursory program of $30,000 each year for communities wishing to bring their ancestral remains and items of cultural significance home from museums around the world. What has been done? Nothing. Finally, the communities across the province are working to rebuild their houses of governance and culture, their houses of healing, healing from the scars that have been caused by this provincial government and our colleagues in the federal government. It's totally unacceptable that when they seek the support of the provincial government, that there's nothing there for them. Indigenous nations are turning to GoFundMe to pay for new longhouses, for healing centers and schools. This, Mr. Speaker, is totally unacceptable. This government must act with urgency in making all resources needed easily accessible for the revitalization of Indigenous languages, the repatriation of ancestral remains and items of cultural significance, healing centers, and the homes of governance and decision-making. Reconciliation means that this government must actively support the return of the cultures, the lands, and the ways of living that were stripped away from Indigenous people in schools like the one that is to be deconstructed in Lower Post. With that, Mr. Speaker, I raise my hands to the leaders of our Cascadena relatives for the important work that is about to take place. Our hearts, our thoughts, and our feelings will be with you as you do this important work in your community.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. 6 a day. That's how many people are dying from an overdose in British Columbia every single day. It's a public health crisis that has deepened under this two-term government. Every month, when the numbers come out, the response from the government is exactly the same. Hopefully, it will get better next month. It's not good enough. Which is why both the official opposition and the third party have written to the Premier to say it is time to try a new approach, only to be rejected by this government multiple times. Can the Premier tell us why it seems that he is the only leader in this legislature who doesn't support working together across political lines to battle this devastating crisis?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, every way that British Columbia can stand up and expand its response to saving lives in the increasingly accelerated drug toxicity tragedy that is hitting our province. In every way, COVID has made it work. In every way, we are stepping up our response, expanding safe supply, doubling the number of supervised consumption sites, doubling the number of youth treatment beds, adding nurse prescribers to medication-assisted treatment. All of this is based on an informed, evidence-based advice that's been given to us by people working on the front lines. And may I take this chance in particular to give thanks to people working on the front lines of the overdose crisis and people working in healthcare. Fighting 2 public health emergencies is extremely hard. As I've said to the members a number of times, in question period and estimates and in correspondence, welcome their participation. It's my intention to follow the very successful pattern laid down by the health minister to work directly together. It was not necessary to establish a committee in order to lay down a very good example of cooperation across all party lines, and I look forward to that.
Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, thank you very much, and the minister should actually correct the record. She said that they would use every single way. That's actually not true. On one hand, the Premier's office has seen a massive increase in his budget to deal with NDP caucus committees. And yet, he will not reactivate the Health Committee because, and I quote, "Committee work is onerous, it's time-consuming, It takes up work to read the reports, complete the report, prepare the report, end quote. That is exactly the point. And on this side of the legislature, the opposition and the third party are prepared to do that work. We've offered not once, but multiple times, and we have been rejected by this Premier. Today is the last day that we are here in this place for 4 months. 6 people a day are dying in this crisis. And the Premier of British Columbia stubbornly refuses to take an action that could make a substantive difference, as every party in this House takes part in a discussion. Getting a briefing from a minister on one subject is simply not enough. So to the Premier again, can he stand up and tell us why he is the only leader in this chamber that is standing in the way of reactivating the Standing Committee on Health to deal with a devastating, ongoing, worsening crisis in British Columbia?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
I know how much the Leader of the Official Opposition appreciated the approach of the Health Minister and Dr. Henry in working collaboratively through the early days and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. I know the Leader of the Opposition was very clear on the record and estimates last week, how constructive and respectful, and I think all British Columbians saw all parties working together in a very clear way. So I'm appreciative to members of the Green Party for accepting our invitation to work in this way. I look forward to the official opposition joining me in this fight in the manner that the Health Minister has telegraphed and successfully laid down. In the meantime, I'll let all members know I continue to draw our basis for the tragic death toll and the need to save lives in our overdose response by working with British Columbia's Overdose Emergency Response Center, which is the umbrella over the community action teams that act in many of your communities. Those are people with lived and living experience and service providers. They directly feed into our province's overdose response plan. And there are others. We are drawing our expertise from people on the front line, and that is informing our response across the whole continuum. There's more for us to do, and we're grateful to those on the front line directing where we put our focus. Thank you.
Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Apparently a good chunk of the 63% increase that the Premier has given his own office budget is supposed to be for intergovernmental relations. So is it money well spent? Well, 4 years on, we are no closer to a softwood lumber agreement, and American tariffs are poised to increase yet again. And in just a few weeks, the cruise ships will begin sailing right past BC ports like Victoria, as a precursor to what may become a permanent state of affairs where they no longer stop at those ports. And along the way, the only thing we've seen from the Premier is a genuine talent for belittling, for dismissing, for insulting the very people he needs to work with to resolve these issues. And my question, Mr. Speaker, is the Premier getting bad advice, or is he actually getting advice to behave more reasonably and responsibly and just ignoring that advice?
Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has been advocating for British Columbia and for a pan-Canadian approach on port reopenings. He has worked with industry, he has worked with other premiers of provinces. He has got provinces like Quebec, New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia to come to a common position. And that position is that the federal government needs to give the certainty to the industry to resume cruise ships. It's critically important to our economy here on BC's West Coast, But you know who the Premier takes advice from and has taken advice from throughout this pandemic? Public health officials who have guided this province safely through a restart that British Columbians are just beginning to enjoy more and more with the reduction of health restrictions. He has guided our economy to have the strongest recovery in the country, a 4.5% growth rate increase projected for next year, 4.5% growth rate projected for the year after, a 99% recovery on jobs from pre-pandemic levels. That's what the Premier has been doing. That's what the Premier has been doing in conjunction with public health officials to keep British Columbians safe and to keep our economy strong and prosperous and positioned to rebound and build back better.
Member for Abbotsford West, supplemental.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't recall the Premier deeming the advice from those officials worthy when it came to selecting a time for an election in the middle of a pandemic. Look, the Premier and the Minister who just responded 2 days ago received this letter from the Victoria Cruise Industry Alliance, who now confronted by legislation in the U.S. that would make permanent changes that would no longer require those cruise ships to visit BC ports, is saying this, quote, "We cannot make the same mistake and underestimate the threat this poses. We cannot be dismissive." And they say this, Mr. Speaker, because the line from the Premier now is, "Don't worry, be happy." Places like Victoria are nice and people, the cruise ships will come here anyways. But here's what the industry says, Mr. Speaker. We know Victoria has something special to offer, but we also know Alaska is the draw for those who book a cruise. We know the cruise lines generate higher revenues during their time in Alaska ports than they do in Victoria. We know they often feel rushed from their Alaska destinations in order to get to Victoria for the necessary stop in a foreign port, end quote. In short, Mr. Speaker, what the Cruise Industry Alliance is saying is that if these cruise ships are no longer legally required to come to ports like Victoria, in many instances, they won't. So, Mr. Speaker, when will the Premier move beyond his denial and wishful thinking and accept the fact that by refusing to engage with the Americans and with Ottawa in a proactive and productive way, he has allowed a situation to develop that has put thousands of tourism jobs at risk up and down the BC coast? And what is he doing today to reverse the damage that his colossal mismanagement of this issue has caused?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the concerns raised by the member opposite. The Premier's been really clear. This is a federal issue. The government has been engaged with our colleagues in Ottawa on this issue. The Premier has talked with the cruise industry, with Ian Robertson here. But what we do hear from this opposition, Honourable Speaker, is that somehow this bill that has a sunset clause is going to result in the decimation of the cruise industry. Well, I will tell you something, Honourable Speaker. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because if they knew exactly how the cruise industry operates, they would know that they are already planning next year's cruise destinations. And I can tell you, as someone who has taken more than the occasional cruise, that my mailbox right now is full of brochures for cruises up to Alaska. And guess what, Honourable Speaker? Where are they departing from? Vancouver to Victoria and up the Inside Passage. The cruise industry, Honourable Speaker, has confidence in British Columbia and Vancouver and Victoria because their brochures that they're sending out to customers all across this province and this country are booked for next year. Honourable Speaker, there's a world first cruise taking place next year. Is it taking place out of Los Angeles? No. Is it taking place out of Seattle? No. It is taking place out of Vancouver. It is a world first, a pole-to-pole cruise, something no other cruise company has done, Honourable Speaker. They have confidence that the cruise industry is here in British Columbia to stay. We are working with the federal government to ensure it's happening. It's a shame that they don't have confidence in the communities of this province and in industry.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As we cruise into the last day of session here, before a 3-month summer break, we are indeed all collectively celebrating the declining COVID-19 deaths, the hospitalizations, the overall cases, after a period that has indelibly been marked by this disease. This summer will bring connections and opportunities that we have missed over the last 15 months and a slow transition to a new world. But while we celebrate these opportunities, for many British Columbians, the effects of COVID-19 have remained and may well be with them well into the future. A recent study published by Fair Health found that close to 25% of those who contracted COVID-19 developed long-term symptoms. Over 145,000 British Columbians have contracted COVID-19 since February of last year, meaning that over 34,000 British Columbians may have or may develop long COVID. These people are struggling with increased fatigue, brain fog, nerve and muscle pain, high blood pressure, and psychiatric issues. My question, Honourable Speaker, through you is to the Minister of Health. We are all excited for brighter times, but COVID-19 remains a harsh reality for thousands of British Columbians. What steps is his ministry taking to provide long-term support for those with long COVID, and how will those supports be offered?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the member for her question. She's quite right that the evidence is that the situation around COVID-19 is improving in British Columbia, but prudence is required, and that's why we're moving step by step with respect to easing restrictions, while continuing to provide the significant support from public health. She's also quite right that many people, particularly those who have been hospitalized, who represent about 5% of COVID-19 patients, that group of people is much more likely to be what are called long haulers or have long-term symptoms. Indeed, most of the studies related to long haulers are related to this group of people. It's also true that COVID-19, and this is, of course, a new virus in the world, is having long-lasting effects. That's why we are leading in terms of research in British Columbia under the direction of Dr. Henry and teams throughout the health authorities in addressing these questions. We've added specialty clinics to support long haulers, and we will continue to do so. In addition to that, we are using the evidence from that to the biobank that's established for those who wish to participate, who are part of that, to continue to improve the care that we need to provide, and to continue throughout our system of primary care to provide support for people. I absolutely agree with the honourable member that this is going to be a continuing and one of the lasting legacies over the next year that and years to come, perhaps, that we will need to address to support those who faced the challenges of COVID-19. And it gives me an opportunity finally to remind everybody of the need to get vaccinated.
Leader of third party, supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response and for the recognition that a lot of people are struggling enormously with the effects, the long-term effects of this virus. And I agree with the Minister that thinking ahead is essential. Cases may be currently declining, but we know that COVID-19 adapts quickly and may present new challenges well into the future. Today, Dr. Gustafson indicated that public health officials are shifting away from emergency pandemic management towards communicable disease control, meaning less of an all-hands-deck approach and more long-term management. She said the response will change as they learn more about the virus's behavior and the level of immunity among the population over time. This government was reluctant to admit that COVID-19 spreads through aerosol transmission. Now they appear to accept the fact, and yet in businesses, workplaces, and schools, we have not seen updated guidance to increase and adapt ventilation. We await the updated guidance for how contract tracing, ventilation, rapid responses in schools, COVID safety plans, and public communications will change over the course of the coming months. My questions for you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Health. Can we expect that the updated guidance will recognize aerosol transmission of COVID and provide effective ways to keep people safe, particularly students and teachers who will be returning to school in the fall?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And I think on behalf of members of the Legislature, I want to thank everybody in the education system for this significant achievement. My colleague, the Minister of Education, teachers, parents, support workers, and education administrators, and of course the students, for all they've done to make this the school year it has been in British Columbia, a school year like no other, but a school year, Honourable Speaker, compared to other jurisdictions that has been fuller and more meaningful in the lives of young people. And I think that's an achievement that everyone in British Columbia can be proud of. The member refers to reluctance. What we've done in BC is follow the guidance of public health. We have learned and adapted throughout this pandemic. One of the significant decisions in that respect, early on in the pandemic and then later on, was the important work of contact tracing and supporting people who test positive for COVID-19. BC has not just led Canada, but the world in both the hiring and the resources we put into this and the remarkable work done by people in contact tracing. What we are doing every day is learning about COVID-19 every single day. I think one of the reasons that Dr. Bonnie Henry is considered not just a good, but a great public servant is because she learns. Because when things change, we adapt and we respond. And we are going to continue to do that every step of the way based on the evidence.
Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anybody I know on this side of the House is surprised at all to have learned that the Premier has bungled yet another issue with the business support programs yet again. We've received confirmation now through a letter from the Finance Minister that all COVID business supports are going to be taxed. This includes the PST rebate and the increased employment rebate. You know, Mr. Speaker, only the NDP thinks it's a good idea now to tax a tax rebate. That's right, let me say that again. We're actually giving money to businesses who are desperately in need of help, and the NDP are now going to tax that. So my question is a very simple one to the Premier. Will the Premier reverse this decision and stop taxing the much-needed emergency COVID rebates that we are providing to businesses?
Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the member raising this question, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect on all that we've seen throughout this pandemic and certainly this session. We are in, I appreciate the comments from all members of this House talking about what we've been able to accomplish, and I think it's important to take this moment to reflect on what we've been able to accomplish here in this chamber in this session. Of course, the
members order. Members, question was asked. Okay. Are we still asking a question or we were waiting for answer? Minister will continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and the member will know that we are proud here in British Columbia. We have provided the highest per capita support for people and businesses in this entire country, Honourable Speaker. 99% pre-pandemic employment numbers, Honourable Speaker. There's so much that we can be proud of. You know, the original budget for small and medium-sized business recovery grant program was $300 million. We expect to be over $530 million in direct grants to businesses throughout this province, Honourable Speaker. That doesn't even mention a whole host of other things that we were able to accomplish. Honourable Speaker, $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion.
Members will come to order. Minister will continue.
The House Leader for the Opposition has questions. He can ask the next question. But, Honourable Speaker, what I wanted to highlight is this, that we have the highest per capita supports.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. They seemed excited today about the last day, but we know that the work is going to continue, Honourable Speaker. Even after today, we're going to continue to work with businesses, we're going to continue to work with people, we're going to continue to work with the nonprofit sector to provide them the supports they need. Overwhelmingly, we're getting positive reviews, and that work will continue as the pandemic moves on.
Member for Peace River South, supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The NDP get into government and they raise taxes on businesses. Then they try to pat themselves on the back, saying we're going to give some of it back during a global pandemic in a tax rebate, only to turn around and tax it and take money away again and claw it back from businesses. These businesses have had to fight for supports. I'll maybe use the Premier's own words. We're in a global pandemic, dude. We need to help them, not tax them further. And it's not just small businesses, it's childcare centres as well. The Emergency Childcare Centre funding will now be taxed by this Premier and this government, meaning parents are going to be forced to pay for that. Childcare centres are going to be having money clawed back through taxes after this government tries to pat themselves on the back for helping them. So, will the Premier stop the clawback to childcare centres and reverse his decision on this emergency funding?
Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, I will remind the members across the way that we have provided the highest per capita supports for people and businesses in this country, Honourable Speaker. Over and over again, it's recognized that because of our... Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Again, highest per capita supports for people and businesses in this country. That's reflected in...
Members, you asked the question. Now let the Minister answer that. Minister.
I appreciate, Honourable Speaker, that all this good news is hard for them to hear, Honourable Speaker. I appreciate that hearing overwhelmingly from all the stakeholders how pleased they are of all the supports we've been put in place. Honourable Speaker, the list is massive this session. Honourable Speaker, recovery benefit that helped people pay $1.3 billion in direct supports. Recovery benefit, we had a $1,000 work benefit that was provided to 600,000 British Columbians. Honourable Speaker, two ICBC rebates to drivers across this province, Honourable Speaker. And that's on top of the $400 average that they're all saving on insurance, Honourable Speaker. Overwhelmingly, we're getting positive responses on all the financial supports that we've provided. They know that. They can't quote a single stakeholder that will say otherwise, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has no plan for dealing with this deadly opioid crisis. Young people are paying a high price. Young people are dying. And when they seek help, the Premier and this government are clearly not there for them. The family of two 17-year-old girls are trying to get them into a residential treatment. These girls are willing to go, and they need to go to a centre without boys. There's one government-funded centre with 4 beds. It's in Victoria. And these beds are reserved for youth 16 to 24 who are pregnant or have children. There is a private facility, but it gets 0 funding from this government. The families have asked the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions for help. They've been met with silence. Will this Premier do the right thing and help get these young women into treatment?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I applaud all young people, anybody across British Columbia struggling with addictions and mental health challenges that steps forward and asks for help. This is exactly the system of care that we are trying to build. Unattended work for a very long time, work that is articulated in our long-term plan, Pathway to Hope, which we have been building out every year since this ministry was created. This year's budget commitment, $500 million, historic investment in building up that system of care. And we are not all the way there yet. It's not, I disagree with the member's characterization on these particular files. We've been working very hard. My ministry has. I can't speak to the specifics of them because this is a matter of direct care and privacy. But I will say that there are 14 publicly funded beds at Westminster House. The system of care that we've been building up, we are doubling youth treatment beds. 6 of them have already been opened on Vancouver Island. We have identified that gender-specific care is a challenge. That is something that we are working with healthcare providers and the health authorities to address through the historic funding to expand bed-based addictions treatment. And the advocacy of the families is important, and we are working hard on it.
Member for Surrey White Rock, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These girls don't need applause from the minister. They need help from this minister and this premier, and they haven't shown up. This minister is in charge of a ministry that actually does not run the ministerial programs that she continues to reference. Her ministry is the smallest in government. It is smaller than the office of the premier, which is increased by $5.7 million. That is enough for 20 additional treatment beds. Dr. Mark Tyndale, a professor at UBC School of Population and Public Health, says, and I quote, "When you look into this ministry, I mean, it's basically just a front. There's no power, there's no decision making. They take quite a junior minister and make her kind of stand there and answer questions, but she has no budget and no power." End of quote. Those are very harsh words. And now we've got a ministry that's been labeled the Ministry of Air. We've got a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions who has openly admitted that she has not met with all the heads of the health authorities. How is this acceptable? It is not acceptable. 6 people dying a day. We need this government to take control and take control now. And it has failed to do that time and time again. My question is to the Premier. Will he do the right thing and make sure that these girls do not fall victim to an inadequate system that continues to fail British Columbians, young peoples, and family day after day?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, I could not disagree more with the way that the member has characterized our government's commitment and commitment to this work. We direct the budgets. We make the Treasury Board submissions. It was our ministry's work and my work as minister that got a historic $500 million investment in mental health and addictions care through this budget cycle. Already across all ministries, $2.7 billion a year is dedicated. And if the member would propose that we build a parallel system of healthcare delivery and artificially amputate mental health and addictions care from the healthcare delivery system, he is wrong and he is not getting his advice from the people on the front line. I direct the health authorities. I've met with every health authority. My ministry talks almost daily with every health authority, all of them across British Columbia, about how to get the best care. The members' party dedicated only 25% in October's election towards this cause. I do take my guidance from the family and the people working on the front lines. We do have more to do, but I'll take no lessons from the member opposite, given his party's failure to build the system of care we so badly need now.
The bell ends the question period. Members, I have the honor of presenting a joint special report from the Ombudsperson and the Information and Privacy Commissioner, Getting Ahead of the Curve, meeting the challenges of privacy and fairness arising from the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector. Madam Clerk. Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to table a petition signed by 30,000 British Columbians who are asking for this government to protect the remaining old growth and implement all the recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review Panel. I will be electronically transmitting the petition to the Clerk's office.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call the estimates for the Ministry of Children and Family Development. They will be doing a vote. When that is done, it will be followed by the estimates for the Premier's Office, which are continuing. In the Douglas Fir Room, I will be calling the estimates for the continued estimates debate in the Ministry of Health. And in Section C, the Birch Room, I call continued debate on the estimates for the Ministry of Transportation.
Committee Chair.
If the members would please leave as soon as possible so we can get going. Thank you. Is the Minister of Children and Family Development available for the vote? Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move vote number 20, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $2,392,755,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Children and Family Development Ministry operations.
Members, the vote is about to take place. If you're participating remotely, please have your voting cards ready. Those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed indicate nay. Motion's carried. Thank you. So now we'll move to the estimates of the Office of the Premier. Premier.
Thank you, Honourable
Welcome
Speaker. Are you just getting up, or? Okay, sorry.
All yours, Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move that vote 11, resolved that a sum not exceeding $14,678,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Office of the Premier.
Thank you. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And because we have such a truncated period of time, I'm going to move immediately to questions. And I'm certainly hoping that the Premier will be respectful of the shortened time we have, and hopefully we'll get some succinct answers. I'd like to pick up where we left off yesterday in terms of the Premier's decision to call an early election. We walked through some of the criteria that led to that decision. We looked at the fact that polling had been done, a program had been created called Stronger BC. We looked at all of the factors that led to the calling of a snap election during a pandemic. The Premier also, at that time, cited another reason, and it was the failure to pass Bill 22, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020. He used that as a reason for calling the election. I'd like to ask the Premier directly if he remains committed to the legislation that families are asking for to protect youth.
Just a reminder to staff, you need your masks, please. Premier of British Columbia.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question, and also to her and the Opposition House Leader for the latitude that is being granted to me to participate in other events this afternoon. I would say that we did canvass this yesterday. It was canvassed also last September and October throughout the campaign. My rationale, my motivation for asking the people what they thought. And with respect to the substance of Bill 22, I remain committed to that. I've made that a priority for the minister responsible, and she is consulting widely to try and resolve the issues that were raised at the time by some members in the community. But I'm committed to the legislation, and I'm hopeful it will have unanimous support when it returns.
Opposition House Leader.
Well, thank you very much, and we're going to explore for a few minutes shortly the work that has or hasn't been done by the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions and by the Minister. It was a year ago, in June 2020, that the government introduced Bill 22. The government has had many months to address the concerns that were raised about the bill and to reintroduce it. This is a crisis. And in question period today, we discussed the fact that 6 British Columbians a day are dying. And this is the Premier that stubbornly refuses to actually accept the offer in multiple letters to a correspondence unit that apparently has received millions more dollars to operate. I would point out to the Premier, I've written to him multiple times, and not once about this issue have I received a personal response from him about something that is critical to me and to British Columbians. This is a crisis, and we need urgent action. Can the Premier explain exactly why youth stabilization care legislation has not been introduced this session?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And the Youth Stabilization Act was tabled, was not likely to pass based on comments by the third party. We have endeavoured over the past number of months to engage with those stakeholders that express concerns about the substance of the bill. I'm confident. I've been receiving an enormous amount of support correspondence from families who share, I believe, the same view that the Leader of the Opposition and I do, that we need to take every step possible to protect people and do what we can to ensure that those that are at risk have the supports that they need.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you very much. And the Premier did note the third party, but as the Premier well knows, there was a broad range of groups that raised concerns over a year ago. And this was one of the reasons the Premier said he called a snap election. So when the legislation was paused a year ago, the government said they would, and I quote, "We'll take this time to talk to more people." So can the Premier, end quote, can the Premier outline exactly what consultation has occurred over the last year?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We have been engaged informally in discussions with stakeholders, those in favour and those opposed. Formal discussions will begin in earnest, I believe, in the next number of weeks. We're committed to bringing the legislation back to this House where there can be a full and frank discussion. And again, I'm hopeful, and I believe, based on the comments from the Leader of the Opposition today, that subject to no significant material changes in the principles that were in Bill 22, that we will have a good discussion and we'll get back to where we want to be. But we are focusing on the voluntary treatment options that were raised at that time. Again, and I know that the Leader of the Opposition will have had similar discussions to those that I've had with parents who've lost young ones to overdose deaths, and they're concerned that that not be in vain and that something be done by government to address that. We felt that Bill 22 was a step in the right direction. Others in this place did not, but I'm hopeful that in due course we will be able to bring that back, have the discussion, and get the outcome that I believe that she and I share.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Premier felt that changes to this bill were so important that he used it as part of his rationale to call a snap election during a pandemic. It has, and the Premier's words today, in quotes, engaged informally, and that formal engagement will take place. The Premier knows exactly what that means, and he should be honest with British Columbians. That means they haven't begun the consultation process that they said they would. Important enough to trigger a snap election. Families devastated across British Columbia, and yes, we've heard those stories. We've heard them. We want to help. We want to actually work on these issues together. So far, the answer to that is a no. Well, I would assume, because, of course, as I've pointed out, haven't received a letter to that effect. In estimates this month, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions said the consultations have not even started. Not my words, the minister's words. Important enough to trigger an election, telling families, we're going to get there, we're going to bring it back. And the minister admitted, after an arduous process, I might add, consultations have not even started. This is a crisis. It has been a year. Can the Premier explain today why none of the consultation promised over 1 year ago has even started? That's with groups like the Independent Representative for Children and Youth, the Chief Coroner, First Nations, the list is long. Can the Premier explain how he broke the promise to begin consultation and bring that bill back to the Legislature?
Premier.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. And the member will know that we have been busy on this side providing more services over the past 12 months. 20 new youth treatment bed centre in Chilliwack, a 75-bed wellness centre at Royal Columbian, hospital, low and no-cost mental health and addictions counseling available virtually throughout the pandemic, BC's first mental health and substance use urgent response centre in Surrey, a doubling of youth treatment beds, 123 in total. That's 100 adult beds across the province. The Foundry system, which was initiated and now greatly expanded under this government, initiated by the previous government and expanded by this government. We've done a lot over the past short while, and there's much more to do. And I don't think we have a significant disagreement on this question. I do know that there were a range of issues that were going through my mind in the summer and fall of 2020. This was certainly one. It was a catalyst, to be sure, and the work with Indigenous peoples, the work has certainly been ongoing through the Ministry of Children and Family Development, through the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, as well as outreach to those independent officers of the Legislature for guidance and counsel. And families, of course, have written to me in large numbers supporting the direction I think that both the Leader of the Opposition and I want to pursue.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you to the Premier for that answer, and I think I'm not even really sure how to proceed when the Premier made a promise on an issue that is part of responding to a crisis in British Columbia where 6 people a day are dying. He had a minister that stood up and admitted that despite her Premier's commitment to consultation on a critical matter, she finally admitted consultation hasn't even started. That wasn't all, the minister said. For all the talk of wanting to work together, work across the aisle, that we all agree, and the opposition raises these issues, here's what the minister said during estimates debate, and I quote, "I will not be telling the member when I plan to finish consultations or when I plan to introduce legislation." Can the Premier fill in the blanks for the public and for the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the third party, families in British Columbia? When will consultation start?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We have been engaged in discussions with the First Nations Health Council, and they have explicitly said they're not yet ready to proceed. I think that it would be a surprise to no one that the events unfolding in Tk'emlúps and Secwepemc territory has focused attention in other directions in that community. I also know that the Leader of the third party has agreed to sit with the minister and review the state of play and take advice and counsel from that side of the House here. I would hope that the official opposition would join in that, and I believe that would be a precursor to this type of collaboration that we all want to see. That was certainly the intention when I asked the minister to respond to the correspondence from the Leader of the Opposition.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Important enough to be part of the rationale for calling a snap election in the middle of a pandemic. We have to consult. We need to fix this. We need to respond. Families sending their concerns to the Premier in large numbers, and the Minister says consultation hasn't yet begun. And not only that, I don't plan, and I quote, "I don't plan to tell you when it's going to start." Again, during the estimates debate, the Minister said, and I quote, "I'm very happy to talk with the member about the programs that we are standing up. None of them are legislative," end quote. Can the Premier explain why his own minister, responsible for this issue, presumably for the consultation on this bill, presumably for responding after this was, again, another reason that this Premier called a snap election, how does his own minister not even consider stabilization as legislation? And that is an important piece of the work that this minister and ministry should be doing. And the quote is, "None of them are legislative." I would love to hear the Premier's explanation for that answer.
Premier.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, I did just inventory a range of initiatives that have been underway just in the past short while. More treatment beds, wellness centres, mental health, substance urgent response teams, none of which required legislative change. So it's completely consistent with what the minister said. Bill 22 was carefully considered by this side of the House. The former minister did go through extensive consultation, and we felt that we were on the right track, but the earnestness of opposition at the time, particularly coming from the third party based on leadership groups across the province, as well as some of the organizations and individuals that the opposition leader just referenced, made it imperative that we pause on that statutory process. But that did not delay or slow one bit the delivery of services and ensuring that we had in place the appropriate processes to protect vulnerable populations, whether they be youth or adults.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Premier said that Bill 22, a year ago, that, and I quote, "will take the time to talk to more people," end quote. It's clear that has not been done. It was so important to put a pause on the bill. It was reflected in the Premier's decision, and he made those comments, not me or not us, that was one of the reasons he called a snap election. And just like so many other things, "I'm going to do things differently," said the Premier. "I'm going to work across political lines. I'm going to create a $10 a day daycare." The list goes on. We're in the middle of an opioid crisis where 6 people a day are dying, and words matter. Families believed the Premier when he said, "We will consult. We'll take a year." And I certainly hope that one of the outcomes of this discussion is that this Premier sits down and has a conversation with his minister. Because let's look at what else she said in estimates. And this isn't about let's just talk about the minister. It's about promises made to British Columbians. A risky pandemic election based, apparently, on the need to deal with this bill. When our critic for mental health and addictions, who I very much appreciate and the work that he has done, when the minister was pressed about her lack of action and lack of consultation on youth stabilization care legislation, her response was, and I quote, "I will simply say that I have made a decision about priority actions within my ministry that I believe our budget well articulates. I will say again that the priority decision that I made was based on what I was hearing personally from people on the front line, end quote. Well, maybe the minister should have listened more carefully to what the Premier told British Columbians before he called a snap election. He put this bill on pause with a promise to British Columbians that he would consult, and that was a year ago. Now we have a minister saying, I've made up my mind about what the priorities are. So maybe the Premier could get up again and make sure that British Columbians and people in this legislature and all of the parties that had concerns and families who are concerned, if the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has chosen her priorities, perhaps the Premier today could articulate for British Columbians where this bill is. And he should stand up and make sure that British Columbians know that he meant what he said, because apparently the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has set her own priorities.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, again, I believe that the actions on this side of the House have been completely consistent. We're delivering services without the requirement for statutory change. That's the position of the government, and we are committed to bringing the legislation back. Independent officers will be consulted. The experts in the field are ready to go in July, and as I said, the First Nations Health Council is not yet prepared to have these discussions, and when they are, hopefully before too long, we'll get underway there. And I am very confident, and I can give the assurances today to the Leader of the Opposition that a variation on Bill 22 will be back before this House for careful consideration, and I'm confident, based on what I'm hearing from the Leader, that her caucus will be united in supporting it.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. What the Premier can be confident of is that the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the third party have offered to work in a transparent, public way, not with a briefing behind closed doors on one issue, about an overdose crisis in British Columbia that's claiming 6 lives a day. There isn't consistency, and the Premier knows it. The Minister said consultation hasn't started. The Premier said a year ago it would start. The Minister says she's set priorities. Apparently, one of them doesn't include moving expeditiously on something the Premier promised British Columbians and used as his rationale, one of the issues he raised for calling a snap election. This isn't just about consultation on legislation. Let's look at another example. Words matter. Most of the mental health addictions and overdose programs in British Columbia run through the 5 regional health authorities. Yet, despite being the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions for over 6 months, this is what the Minister was forced to admit the other day, and I quote, "I have not met with all the CEOs of the health authorities yet," end quote. Does the Premier think it is acceptable that during a crisis of this magnitude that continues to get worse, every month the numbers are worse than they were last year, does he think it is acceptable that the minister he tasked with this responsibility has yet to even meet with the people responsible for programs in regional health authorities across British Columbia?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, the Minister and this government is committed to delivering services, and I'm absolutely confident that the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions is discharging her responsibilities, because it's evident in the creation of more treatment beds, it's evident in the Urgent Response Centre that was established, it's evident in the virtual programs that we put in place through the pandemic. The challenge that I think the opposition has is that for 16 years they didn't address mental health and addictions questions to the extent that we have in the short time we've been here. And I appreciate very much that they want to now get on board, and I welcome that. I encourage the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Chair, to follow the lead of the Leader of the third party. Let's have the Minister and the two leaders sit down, figure out where there's an opportunity for collaboration, and let's get going on that. Hyperbole is, on all sides, is not what the public wants. What they want is the delivery of services. We've been doing that. As the Minister said, services that don't require statutory change. The challenges of the bill that was brought forward were made abundantly clear by a range of individuals, including independent officers and Indigenous leadership. We're going to focus on that. We're going to get that done, but there have been no shortage of other tasks at hand that also have an impact on mental health and wellness. That has been a priority coming out of the pandemic as well. We all know the anxiety that people are feeling in their own homes and in their own communities. Imagine that across 5+ million people in this province. We have a health challenge, of course, when it comes to opioid addictions. We've been working to try and destigmatize, to try and ensure that we are legalizing modest possession for personal use so that we do not have people characterized as criminals because they have an addiction to opioids. These are basic steps forward, and we require, in that instance, support from the federal government, and we'll continue to work on that. There's a whole host of other initiatives that are underway. Prescription alternatives, for example, again, have been expanded significantly under our government, and we're going to continue to do that. We have a toxic drug supply. Legislation will not amend the toxic drug supply. What we need to do is make sure that the services that do exist are funded appropriately, and as we expand those services, as was contemplated under the Act, Bill 22, we'll get to that place where we have unanimity around the table, including those that were opposed in the summer of 2020, to get the bill passed, and I'm counting on support from the opposition to do that.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, I take it that the Premier is not overly concerned then that the Minister, who needs to be working on a regular basis with people who work on the ground in every corner of this province, who deal with addictions and overdose programs across this province, hasn't heard from his minister. I think, in fact, the comment was, well, it's hands off. I don't tell them what to do. It's not about that, and the Premier knows it. And we also know that the Premier's characterization of the past track record of the government is also not accurate. Work was done, significant work, often led by Dr. Perry Kendall and others who cared about this issue passionately. And it is not a partisan issue. It is an issue of a Premier who said he was going to do something and hasn't done it. And there can be all kinds of excuses proffered, but the fact of the matter was, he said a year ago that consultation would take place. Families have been crying out for an opportunity to see work done on this piece of legislation. The minister says, oh, not my priority, I'm doing this, this, and this. Let's talk about the size of the ministry itself. And we know that over the last number of days, I've canvassed in the legislature the Premier's office budget. This year alone, $3.3 million. Let's compare that to the increase for the Ministry of Health and Addictions, which I would remind the Premier is the smallest ministry in government. The increase was 0.18%. So the Premier can't stand today and argue that effective ministry getting all kinds of work done when it is clear that the minister has made it clear she doesn't manage and run the programs. 0.18% was the increase in the budget for the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. I would appreciate the Premier standing up and explaining for us the process that went into deciding that his office would get $3.3 million and a ministry that is tasked with important critical work, like trying to figure out how we are going to deal with 6 people a day dying in our province, gets 0.18%. Could the Premier explain for us the process and the absolutely shocking difference in budget increases?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And again, as an experienced member of this place and an experienced member of Cabinet, the opposition leader will know that the delivery of services is the responsibility of health authorities. And we have increased in Budget 2021 the delivery of services for mental health and addictions by over $500 million. This is part of a $1.2 billion investment over the past number of years in the various foundations of the Pathways to Hope, allowing real progress on true systems of care that offer coordinated services for mental health and substance use, as well as accelerating the response to the overdose emergency. And there's a litany of other initiatives that are contained in that. The budget, the office budget for the ministry is not the delivery of services. That's the model that we set up, and it's working effectively.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Well, I think there's a lot of debate, and rightly so, about whether or not the ministry is working properly. I think that having a ministry for mental health and addictions is important. But what's even more important is what gets done. So on one hand, we have the Premier outlining that this ministry doesn't look after service delivery. In fact, it's health authorities, only to discover that the person sitting in the office with the title minister hasn't even talked to the health authorities that deliver that service. Well, the Premier can shake his head, but the minister actually said she hasn't spoken to them. So the fact of the matter, well, the Premier can stand up and...
Please, through the chair. Thank you.
The Premier can stand up and correct the record. His minister said that she had not spoken directly to the regional health authorities that deliver service. I would suggest that it's probably important that the person who's sitting in the office with the title actually lines up with the people delivering the services on the ground. And the Premier must feel some degree of concern that this is a ministry that recently has been titled the Ministry of Air. I don't say that in a flippant or casual way. I actually care that something gets done. We have a crisis that continues to deepen under this Premier's leadership. It's not just us, and the Premier can, shake his head, or the media saying that this is a ministry of error. Let's look at what Professor Tyndall at UBC School of Population and Public Health had to say. This should concern the Premier. He should want to walk out of this chamber today and fix this. Here's the quote. When you look into this ministry, it's basically just a front. There's no power. There's no decision-making. They take a junior minister, quite a junior minister, remember, these are not my words, quite a junior minister, and make her kind of stand there and answer questions, but she has no budget and she has no power. Will the Premier agree today that there needs to be additional work to ensure that the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions is leading, aligned, engaged in, dealing with this crisis with people on the ground who deliver those services? Will he at least admit that there is room for improvement and that he is committed to doing that?
Premier.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. And again, for those who are just tuning in, British Columbia was the first jurisdiction in the country to dedicate an individual at the cabinet table to ensure that we were focusing on this issue. It's been duplicated in Ontario with an associate minister that, again, as with the model here, they took the template. The health authorities deliver the services. They have always delivered the services. To create a parallel process of service delivery would have been counterproductive. The objectives that we set out here starting to be duplicated in Ontario, and just recently, Manitoba has also followed suit by putting in place a minister responsible for mental health and addictions with a model similar to what we have here. The health authorities have the expertise. The minister is engaging with the health authorities on the delivery of those services. That's how it happens, Honourable Speaker. It goes through the authorities as it should. I'm confident that there's always room for improvement in everything we do. I would suggest there's also room for improvement in the estimates process, whereby we focus on the budget estimates for the various components of government rather than drive-by issues that were raised in question period on one day, had full and frank canvassing by the minister responsible for the files, full and frank discussions for the people responsible. I am proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and I know we have much, much more work to do, and so do British Columbians. The best way to do that is to start by collaborating. The overture has been made. The overture has been made to the Leader of the Opposition and to the third party. The third party has agreed. Let's sit down. Let's figure out where we go together, and that's the commitment that I think I would like to hear from the other side right now.
We still have 5 more minutes. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much. That is an absolutely unbelievable answer. Let's sit down and collaborate. Like to hear about it, like to talk about it. How about the Premier walks back to his office and asks his recently multi-million-dollar correspondence branch how many letters that I and the Leader of the third party have sent this Premier offering to work together in a nonpartisan way. And for this Premier to suggest that issues raised in estimates are drive-by issues, shame on him. Today, the drive-by issue of the day, according to the Premier, is talking about, with seriousness, how do we improve the services coming out of the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions? That hasn't been only my concern, and the Premier knows it. We have heard it from across British Columbia. I take the Premier's words seriously. I look forward to a response to my request, the Leader of the third party's request, to stand up the Health Committee, stand up the Aboriginal Affairs Committee. Because if he means what he said in this legislature today and before, that is exactly what he would do this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. In this year's budget, $500 million more for mental health and addictions. $500 million more. 20 new treatment beds in Chilliwack, 75 wellness beds at Royal Columbian. Low cost, no cost, in some instances, no cost mental health and addictions counselling available virtually. BC's first standalone ministry focused on making sure that every single day there's someone at the cabinet table addressing these issues.
Premier, one moment, please. We'll have order. Thank you. Go ahead.
I appreciate that we're running short on time, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the interventions by all members of the House during this budget debate. But at this point, if there are no further questions, I move the committee.
Thank you, Premier. There's actually a vote that I have to do beforehand. Are there any further questions from the opposition? Leader of the Official Opposition. Leader of the Official Opposition, do you have a question?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I apologize, I was distracted. I would like today, first of all, to thank the staff that have supported the Premier in his estimates. We know very well how hard the public service works in British Columbia. I would like to suggest to the Premier that characterizing an estimates process that brings issues that are sincerely brought, that matter to British Columbians, should hardly be characterized as drive-by issues, and I personally find that offensive. With that, though, Honourable Chair, my last question is simply, will the Premier today commit to activating the Standing Committee on Health, the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Relations, to allow for there to be work done in a way that is transparent, that is public, that serves the benefit of the public good? And I would remind the Premier, Honourable Speaker, that in his mandate letter to every single minister in government, he said he would take good policy ideas and he encouraged his ministers to do the same. I would suggest there's an easy way to do that, and that is through the Standing Committee process. Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Premier, British Columbia.
Oh, thank you, Honourable Chair. And I also want to thank members for participating and the staff, as always, for support. I just will also highlight that we had an anomaly yesterday because of the three-house system, where the accountable minister for health was on his feet, and a member was asking the very same questions of that minister that were being asked in here of the budget estimates for the Premier. That's the context with which I made the comment that the member took such umbrage with. I do believe firmly that the best way for us to provide services to British Columbians, as they expect us to do, is to collaborate. That's why the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has reached out at my request to the leaders of both parties to sit down and to figure out where we go together. That appears to be inadequate for the Leader of the Opposition. It seemed to be appropriate in the minds of the Leader of the third party. I would suggest that the best way to get to the outcomes that the Leader wants is to sit down and talk about it, and the Minister is waiting for that overture.
Thank you, colleagues, for the order as we ended this debate. Vote is about to occur on vote 11. Please have your voting cards ready. Shall vote 11 pass? Indicate aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Vote 11 is carried. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move that the committee rise and report resolution and completion on the estimates of the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and further report resolution and completion on the estimates of the Office of the Premier, and ask leave to sit again.
You have heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion is carried.
Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee Supply, Section B, reports resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and further reports resolution and completion of the estimates of the Office of the Premier, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader? So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section C, reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Acting Government House Leader?
Next sitting.
So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section A, reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Health, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again?
Next sitting.
Okay. So ordered. Acting Government House Leader.
I move the House now adjourn.
Members, you heard the motion. All in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. this afternoon.